As soon as we're a red light, there we go. Hello. Oh, start up the clickety-clack light bulbs and all of that. Welcome to my evolution hour. We've got a lot of fun subjects to go over, I hope, and a lot of science to drop on us. And there is the exciting logo of Troubles in Paradise, the Methodology of Creationism Project. There is my website, tortugan.wordpress.com. If you don't have that on your PC and on your smartphone somewhere on a little tab, heck, get on the ball here. Okay, so there's the stop sharing, and I can shut that cute little thing down and proceed accordingly. Oh, hi, now I can see things. Hi, we got Eat Meal in the thing, and Old Scratch, and Andy. I guess they must have just come over from another show. We have Karis. Yes. Hello. We have Aptivist.
Hey.
And we have a map projection that's on mute. And I don't know who that is. They have not yet unmuted. At any rate, I'm using the new camera and the new audio system that was donated. Suris did a spectacular job of rabble-rousing the mob to bring in some funds so that I can get stuff so that I can do the audiobook of the Paralogs of Fog and presumably an audiobook of Slam Dunk, which will be a trickier thing to do, doing science as a pure audiobook, but I think I can pull it off. I'll have to do some rewritings and that, but that'll be farther down the road. The map has left. Anyway,
I can only stay for a couple minutes because
okay. Well, then
somebody posted your hangout in a comment section. I came to it.
Yeah, have you seen my debate with Kent Hovind, Karis?
I haven't. I've been doing so much stuff, but I'm going to
my debate with Kent Hovind.
Know. I suck
because
so
I
bad.
think I did really, really well. I think I did better than Aaron Ra did, frankly.
Ooh, that's
yeah. Well, because I know the backfield with Kent Hovind in a way that Aaron doesn't. And so I know what he's done, and I also hit him directly on a recent stupid that he did, and you'll find out all about that because of his parasitical citing of Harun Yahya, the Turkish creationist. And I put him off his game, I think, because of Aptivist, who had also seen the debate, he can attest to this in due course there, that I had watched him set up his PowerPoint and all. That's the usual shtick that he does in almost all of his debates. But he never got around to using it anywhere in my discussion because I short-circuited him. I moved ahead to my source methods analysis of his scholarly stuff, and he was kind of peeved all the way through. And I had already rehearsed it was a fixed debate. He likes doing fixed debates. Well, I already knew he was going to do his whatever spiel he was going to do, and he's not that good at improvising. Whereas I had already rehearsed my 12 minutes and 10 minutes and that. So I knew pretty much what I wanted to discuss and how to do it within the time limit and hit my points. And also I was in the live feed. The guy that was doing the debate had never done that before. And I was trying to explain what a wrench is and how to access it. And so here I'm the old fart, like I'm the expert in the field and I'm telling this guy how to do a hangout. Wow. Anyway. Yeah, it was a weird circumstance. But anyway, he did a nice, fair job. But I wanted to monitor the conversations that were going on in the side chat because there were actually some really good questions in there. In fact, the one that I got asked was the one I definitely wanted to get asked about. I think the guy in question didn't think I answered it properly. But you can find out about it. It was about the nature of thought and consciousness and all of that. Where did all that stuff come from? And I discussed a little bit of that. I also demonstrated that I know more about baraminology than Kent does. And and so, it's just, he was just an interesting thing. And because I'm constantly going after source methods approach, that underpinning below the data field, below the philosophy, whereas Aaron still is a philosophy down, hit the data field and not ask how the other person does or doesn't know about the data field. That's missing the source direction. So that's where I differ significantly from the way Aaron Ra and quite a few other people who have taken on Kent Hovind over the years. They are not coming at it from a source methods direction. So, of course, 20,000 people watched Aaron Ra, and, I got a couple, 500 or 600 that have seen my debate so far. But so everybody spread the word.
Well, we're working on that. I mean, if everybody in the chat right now could go to RJ's Twitter or Facebook, depending on where you're coming to him from, go to RJ's Twitter or Facebook and start spreading the word about his book, about his channel. Just help this guy out.
I got links in this video to both the Kent Hovind debate and to Slam Dunk. And so everybody, slam dunk. The reason why I bought the damn reptile mammal transition up is because I know the complete data field on that. I'm not sounding braggy here. I literally surveyed the entire data field. So I know all the technical literature and every single anti-evolutionist response to it, all the way up to the publication of the book in 2016. So you literally know every possible counter argument that an anti-evolutionist has ever made to the reptile mammal transition. So you're way ahead of them. And Kent doesn't even come up on the scope on that. He has never addressed that. So what can he do?
Right. I think that would be very interesting for those who have come out of Christianity and who have seen the homeschool materials that Answers in Genesis puts out. They have books that are designed for students in the public school to try to counter their science teachers, whether it's biology or sciences, whatever. But they sell these to the parents who give them to the students, and then have the students play evangelists in the science classroom. But the students don't have the background that somebody like you has. So if you've put this in a format that the regular layman can understand, this would be incredibly helpful. I encourage everybody to check this out.
It was intended to be also something that functions all the way up through the food chain into the science level, apart from the fact that it doesn't have illustrations, which is the point that Christine Janis, the paleontologist, said. It needs pictures, and I'm going, duh. I'd love to do a second edition of it with pictures, but I didn't have the ability to get the rights to them. But the point is that it's at a full college technical level in terms of the technical literature.
What kind of pictures do you need?
Well, they're basically the illustrations from the technical journals and elements, some of which is some of the stuff that's in the anti-evolution books. But an awful lot of them are charts that were in the technical papers. They're graphs that were in Science magazine and Nature, and these the things on feather formation, on the jaw transition. They're graphics. Oh, and plus the chart in Science magazine that would relate to Michael Behe's chloroquine case in The Edge of Evolution. All of that stuff, if you see it, you're going, whoa, okay. Theoretically, you can find the source by going to the other material, but I prefer to have it in a nice visual format. And I have a whole stack downstairs of new material that's popped up on the reptile mammal transition front since I did the book, that if I do a second edition, I would update it all the way up to that current material. So I'm ready to go, but I can't find a normal publisher because I'm just an inconsequential lowly drone here out in the middle of nowhere. So anybody who knows anybody in the publishing business, who knows science things, or literary reviewers or literary agents, or people who know literary agents, any of those connections that people can do to help jumpstart this process, I'm ready to go. I have no worries about the technical quality of the technical literature because Christine Janis is the most stickler of paleontologists. And it wasn't a matter of me sending the book to her. She had been following my work for years and had bought it all on her own. And I only found out she'd read the damn thing when she decided to accept my Facebook friendship on the thing. And I mentioned the book and says, oh, I have that. It's brilliant. And I'm going, can you put a review up about that? So I had to kind of do her little prod and away we go. So it's one thing after another. Anyway, thank you and if Karis has to disappear, your dulcet tones are always delightful to listen to. Yeah, and get feedback when you do finally watch the debate, because
one note though, Aaron Ra, I do know, was working on a database, and he was basically putting out a call to artists, those who have skill in technical illustrations, etc. So if you have access to Aaron Ra, I might ask Peter about that, or access to any of these artists who may have gotten into contact with him, that would be incredibly useful for something the likes of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, there are a lot of charts. The chart that I have to illustrate the difference between sympatric and allopatric speciation that I put in my website thing is pathetic. It's what I could do with a little thing with a table chart. You know, it's blech.
You can do a lot with
I have skills, but artistry and graphics skill is not one of them. And so I don't have that panache that genuine artists have. And there is nothing more delicious than what an artist can do to take somebody's concept and illustrate it in such a way that it's immediately accessible visually.
RJ, talk to me later. I am an artist, but generally I do hyper-realistic paintings. This would be new for me. I could give it a try, but it's nothing that I'm going to put in public unless I have it basically perfect.
Well, I'm getting into the same thing with Peter, because he is hoping to work with me on doing some t-shirt things, including the map of time and various Tortugan concepts and stuff, so we can have a whole line of products. so people can display the stuff, and we can theoretically make some money that way too. Whatever we're trying to do on it, I'm scrabbling along, but there's only so many balls I can juggle in the air, and in addition to financial worries at the same time.
RJ, you need someone. Never mind.
Oh, Interstellar Artois says, can't wait to go to RJ's book tour. I think I would do damn well at it. I'm good. There's a bunch of postings up at my website of lectures. In fact, I finally created a new tab where I'm kind of consolidating some of the stuff on the various lectures and debates and stuff that I've done. So you can find all the links in one tab that way. I'm not a bad speaker. I'm Peter Bogassian, when I lectured his class down there on atheism on intelligent design quite a few years ago, was gobsmacked at how good I do Q&A. He is uncomfortable in Q&A, whereas I thrive on it. I love the feedback of questions, because that's where you measure how the audience got what you got. Did they understand what you're talking about? And are they sparked to think of new things? So to my mind, I hate a lecturer who comes in with their hour-and-a-half long spiel that they delivered 8,000 times. And we've all seen them do it, from P.Z. Myers to Michael Shermer.
Oh.
And then there's like the little 20-minute Q&A. No, a half-hour lecture where you compress your ideas down and get it on the road, and then an hour and a half of Q&A. That's my venue. That's what I love doing, because boy, I won't run out of things to discuss and you feed and build off of the audience. I'd like to have like a flowing microphone, because in Bogassian's case, I went down into his class and I'm walking and sitting down next to them and get eye contact and all of that, because the idea of the lecturer sitting up on the chair and then the person comes up to the little microphone and timorously, okay, here's me. No, that's no way to have a discussion.
Okay, well, I do need to go, but talk to me.
Bye, Karis. Okay, well, you're on Twitter, so give me a hang up, and you can put a little message to me in the instant message part, the direct messages.
I have to go on another hangout. I'm supposed to be talking about the Stanford prison experiment. So.
Oh yeah, that's a deliciously creepy thing, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Bye all.
Anyway, so slight derailment.
Bye, Carol.
From the original. I'll just do a brief summary of what I was talking about regarding the actual theoretical subject. And keep an eye on the live chat there, because I often have missed over there. The Contested Bones book that was sent to me many moons ago by somebody who didn't want to have to analyze it himself and didn't want to buy it under those circumstances, but offered, hey, if I bought it for you, would you do an analysis of it? I go, yeah. And so it's been a very useful operation to plow through the source base from pure source methods approach, which is basically checking out all their primary sources and figuring out how they deal with them. Rupi and Samford are both young Earth creationists, and they're terrible scholars. They're parasitical arguers. They have a thing that must be true, and in their dogma, Australopithecines were just apes. They weren't bipeds. They were tree climbers that are like chimpanzees and gorillas. And then human beings are human beings, and anything that's close to us, like Neanderthals or Homo habilis or Homo erectus, are really just misidentified, slightly mutant people. So they've got these two polarities that you can never have anything in between. But the whole story of the Australopithecines into the early habilines and into Homo erectus on is just a matter of spectrum overlap, to where is it this or is it that? Well, it's hard to tell. It could be this, it could be that. That's exactly what you would be seeing in a relatively leisurely transition, in which you've got some nodes that are probably taking place over 500,000 years or so, when you get a new fissioning species that then kind of settles in. So you have longer periods. Homo erectus is a relatively stable species over most of its couple million year run, but then again produces these little offshoots that eventually lead into Neanderthals and us, and then the Denisovans, and then who knows what else hasn't shown up on the scope yet, because they didn't end up dropping dead in the right spot to have their bones preserved. So we get a lot of that. Anyway, what the whole point of a source methods approach is that you don't take my word for it. Oh, don't take my word for it. No. The pundit on the screen may be correct, but the only way you know that is to read for yourself. So what I'm trying to do is to put up primary sources that are directly accessible, directly linkable, full text. Don't do a damn bit of good to put up a thing that's got a NBI abstract that you don't have access to, that's just the abstract. No, the whole essence of the source methods is to be able to read the whole paper so that you can see their whole argument, learn from it, see what the creationist was saying about it, and realize, boy, they're really parsing this data field. Constantly, Rupi is stepping over evidence that the Australopithecines were bipeds. Yes, they could climb trees way better than people. They had a bipedality that was not fully developed. They didn't have the full archway that our human species has. That happens later on. And the papers they present has all that information in it, if you bother to look. And even today, most paleontologists will say that they are a fully bipedal species that was really good at climbing trees. There's still a delicious debate as to about how often they wanted to do that, especially in the breaking up of the forest canopies and the formation of more savanna style. And there was still a lot of foresting, and there's still a lot of debate about the particular niches and how the climate of Africa was changing. See, now suddenly you got a whole bunch of new topics that are related to biogeography and other species that are in the same thing. Apparently there are some extinct species of, I think it was either gibbon or orangutan, that one of the bones showed up in Lucy Australopithecines by accident. And they're very, very similar, but when they look really, really close, they realize, oh, actually this had gotten slipped in when they were digging the bones out, and that gives you some clues about what animals existed around the same time. By the way, it was an extinct species too, so it wasn't a modern version. Every one of those are blips on the evolution scope. Anyway, there were a couple papers that I put out. One, the old 1976 Don Johanson paper, where again, Rupi does this nice lawyer bit of repeating his main discussion at the end of the chapter, double dipping. And one of the double dips is that Don Johanson found evidence that humans were coexisting with Australopithecine, Lucy. No, he didn't. He did say that there were some fossil bones there that were consistent with there being early Homo. That's our genus. That's not Homo sapiens. And to then jump to the idea that human beings and Australopithecines were traipsing around in the same strata. Nope. And Johansson's paper didn't show that at all. And I put a link up to it so you can read it. And you don't take my word for it. And of course, remember, this is, yipes, over 40 years ago. There's been paleontology since then. So let's get caught up to speed here. And so there's several other papers in relation to sexual dimorphism, which is still a debate that goes on, although the pendulum has tended to swing to where they suspect that the Australopithecines were not as sexually dimorphic as a lot of apes are today, which means that the male and female are very, very different size. That they're probably much more balanced, and that therefore some of the ones that they were taking as exceptionally small or exceptionally large were actually maybe a separate species. That's the tendency there. And this has effect because the reason why species become sexually dimorphic relates to how they breed, whether they have a harem of a main masculine with a bunch of females or not. These dynamics connect up to that. So that's inferential evidence about behavior and social structure and all of that. So these are issues that are really fascinating. And I guarantee you, if you only rely upon creationists to filter the data field for you, you're not going to know much about it. And you're not going to make much sense out of all of that stuff. So that was the first order of business that I wanted to cover. And then the next one, of course, is one that activists can attest to, which is, I debated Kent Hovind last week. Ha, 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 ha. I have been itching to do this for a long time. And frankly, I'm glad it was now rather than even a few years ago, because I know a lot more. And I am glad that I had already written Evolution Slam Dunk before I did the debate with Hovind, because I think it helped a lot. Give your impression of what you saw from the debate.
Well, just like you did, you used the source method, and primarily you knew exactly what he was going to say. You planned well ahead of time, and you knew how to counter his arguments nonetheless, which is the easy thing. But the one thing he could not do was respond. Well, the one thing he couldn't do was even touch the reptile mammal transition, because he doesn't know anything about it.
Yeah. And I knew he couldn't possibly know anything about it because he's a bottom feeder. His entire understanding of the issue is what he copies from other people. That was the whole criticism I was making with him copying from Harun Yahya, because he was relying on somebody else to tell him what somebody else thought about something else that he's never bothered to study about. And this was glaringly obvious. And I think he recognized that this was a problem for him, because boy, he was kind of all the way through from his point of view. He looked testy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he called you the altar boy of atheism.
Yeah, at the end, he was so frustrated he resorted to ad hominem, and I deflected it. Says, "Yeah, I'm an altar boy for reason. Yeah, I'm happy to take that appellation, but I wasn't bringing up God. I wasn't discussing religion at all. I was discussing the fossils." And another area I felt was really nice is when I was able to discuss baraminology, which is the creationist systematic thing. And I don't think he's read much of it. And I have read a lot of it, and I know the principles behind it. And so I'm in the weird position of explaining a creationist concept to a creationist who doesn't understand the creationist concept. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
So everybody out there, when I look at Aaron Ra, who has debated Hovind, and did okay, but he wasn't approaching it from a source methods direction. But he has an audience of tens of thousands of people, whereas I, poor little lonely RJ, I think the last time I looked, we gotten up to 600 people, which is not bad for amount, but I'd love it to be 6,000. I'd like it to be even higher, to where people can see what's going on and they can follow up on the sources themselves. That's another thing that I really insist on, is the idea of having direct source links. I made it a point that I would have my earlier piece that I had done on Kent, one of the evolution hours, where I brought up the stuff about the Harun Yahya thing, because that link in the course description linked off to Kent's video and the Alan Fiducia paper and the Harun Yahya post and all of that. So anybody that links that link can then follow up on their own with the primary source data field, rather than sticking it in to the other. The other interesting issue is I telegraphed to Kent in advance what I was going to talk about. I had called attention to it, the reptile mammal transition, the Harun Yahya matters. I brought this up to him before, so it isn't as though I blindsided him with something that he was completely unfamiliar. It's just that he never bothered to look. He never bothered to check. He never bothered to look into what I was doing and to know what the hell I was going to be dealing with, and then do a crash course, over a course of a couple of days to figure out what the hell therapsids were. I would have loved to have seen that part. That would have been absolutely delightful. Anyway, whether or not Peter will be able to arrange my discussion with Kent Hovind, which has been pending for quite some while, it may be pending forever if he decides that he doesn't really want to have a discussion with me on such matters. But if so, I'm going to be wanting to discuss source methods, which is, how does he construct his arguments? What does he rely on? What does he choose to rely on? I can see that's the neat thing about source methods. It's objective. Mandelbrot says Aaron Ra mopped the floor with Jaronism in a debate. Aaron is very well. Jaron, of course, is a flat earther. He's a bottom feeder beyond bottom feeding. Even Kent Hovind accepts the Earth is round. So you've got a different data set there. But Aaron is very knowledgeable. He's very formidable. He can have a little bit of a testy temper at times that can be frustrating. And if you don't know your opponent's data field properly, you don't know the areas where they're going to be a problem. And that's the only area where I would say that Aaron might have limitations with certain people. And of course, then I think the debate that he had, or discussion he had with Mr. Intelligent Design, that nobody could be expected to do Mr. Intelligent Design pleasantly, because he's just a strange, charming crank who lives off in left field somewhere. And at some point, you have to realize all of that. But anyway, debates can serve useful purposes, provided you understand that you're not there to persuade your opponent that they're wrong. Because if they're that far off the field, they have mechanisms that prevent them from changing their mind. So that's not a thing. Nor will you be able to persuade their primary enablers and believers, because they have the same methodological problems that the person you're debating does. What you want to do is, for people who are thinking that there's some kind of a controversy there, that they can listen to it and see one side do an argument and your side do an argument, and hopefully they'll say, you know, one side is really paying attention to stuff and the other one isn't, and you don't want to be the one that isn't, so that you can get them enticed on to follow up on their own, because everybody ultimately has got to make up their minds on the data field. And if they don't really look at that data field, if you can't drag them to it by some means or other, then they're part of the problem. They're not the solution. So that's, I'm a devout methodologist. Method is everything. And I think, as Kent demonstrates and everybody else that I try to use it on, they can't play this game. It's not they do it badly, which they do. It's they literally can't think about the ways you need to think in order to do proper source methods, which is you think through what you think happened. You pay attention to all the data. You're seeking out all the data. You're trying to account for all the data. And no, they don't do that. They have conclusion first, information only when convenient. And now, one of the things, let me put in my shameless plug early. So, because I want to get to the other part of the show here, let me put up my Patreon thing. I know there, eventually I may be able to get a platform that's a bit more sophisticated, where I will be able to have stuff queued up in ways that don't have to go through all of my pathetic rigmarole, but that's because I'm a schlub and I'm still early at this. Anyway, there's my patrons. We added a new one. We're up to, I think, 21, 22 now. There's Stephen and Mary Gale and Dyer and Andrew and Eat, who is in the live chat watching, and Yui and Mona and Hendrel and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Bo, another new one, Eric and Benjamin and the Staggles and Alex and Suris, wonderful Suris, who helped get the microphone and all the rest. Bo, who has popped up in a lot of Sci-Strike stuff. He's a newcomer. I think he's in Europe. Totes Rao, Everett, and Paul. Thank you all. There's my WordPress.com. I will point out the Patreon thing, but with the caveat that it's more symbolic at the moment than real, because I'm at too low of a level that I don't actually get the money in there. So if you want to do a simple thing like, you know, a couple bucks or something, that's not going to be a problem. That's kind of just a nod to say hi. If you really want to help the project in a substantive, boy, get the money quick to me. The GoFundMe.com, that's what I've been doing. And I can guarantee you that stuff gets to me because it's helpful and it happens in just a couple of days. So there's my shameless plug and my nod to all the patrons who have helped the project, who recognize that maybe I'm not an idiot and that I'm saying stuff that's kind of useful and new in a fresh way. I'm very much banging the drum for source methods. This is the thing that's been the whole thrust of the TIP project over the years, is a realization that there was a methodological underpinning to creationism that isn't restricted to creationism. Creationism is just a symptom of the method, that it's popping up in a lot of other areas. And as everybody in Sci-Strike's feed in that knows, they see it manifested in anti-vaxxers, in flat earthers, in all sorts of weird people who believe all sorts of weird things. But the method is always the same. So once you understand the source methods approach and how to try to prod people to explain where they're getting their data field from. Now, you'll sometimes get the deer in the headlight moment when you ask them about their source methods and they, what, fact checking, what, that's literally what happened with Matt Huffman when I had a debate with him. He's a young earth creationist that had an abortive debate that ended early, but at least I got that question in, and he has never come back for part 2. So we'll see how that little thing goes. Anyway, someone who watched the debate with Hovind called my attention on Facebook to a debate or a review that Potholder did way back in 2008 on some of Kent Hovind stuff. And most of Kent's stuff is video lectures. And so even I am not familiar with his entire oeuvre because so much of it's bloody boring. I'm much more interested in the stuff that's had transcripts compiled to where you can read the text of it. Anyway, there were some neat little blips in this on radiometric dating, which was right up my alley because I'm doing the radiometric dating chapter for the new book with Jackson Wheat, where we're going to take on the Answers in Genesis Answers books in the same way that I took on the reptile mammal transition. Does this sound good?
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and again, it's a field nobody has really hit before, and it's going to be ridiculously up to date on a whole swath of things that Bodie Hodge and Jeffrey Tompkins and Andrew Snelling. I'm doing the radiometric dating chapter. Anyway, the blip that Potholer had lit into was an older video, obviously pre-Slammer, before he went into jail. probably late 1990s or early 2000s, in which he had several little postings of things that radiometrically dated stuff as really old that aren't like seals and other things and mollusks and shells. And he went through and Potholder listed the source material, and that way I could track down what the original material was. So this was stuff that I didn't already have in my tip bibliography, and it was useful add-ons. The one really fun one that I put the linkage up to related. Yes, I agree, Brian Stevens. Potholder, good stuff. Yeah, he's witty. The Brit accent helps in that, and plus he's very thorough, and he's basically doing source methods, same way as I do. Follow the sources, damn it. And he calls it and does better graphics than I do, freely admit, but I'm a zip on that, so I'm way behind on that. But anyway, it was on the Miller affair. Hugh Miller was and remains a young Earth creationist who decided he was going to radiocarbon date some dinosaur bones, which of course you can't do because they're too old. There's no carbon there. Anyway, he finagled 4 dinosaur fragments out of the Carnegie Museum, and they warned him, excuse me, but you're going to radiocarbon date these things? The only thing you're going to date is the shellac that we used as preservative. That you might be dating because they're covered over with stuff, and they warned him about that. And then when he took it to the University of Arizona, they said, there's no collagen at all in these dinosaur bones, so there's nothing to date radiocarbon, but, there's the preservative on the outside. So basically what he was dating was the shellac that was used on the thing. And naturally they came up with relatively recent dates because, of course, organic material is going to present all sorts of mixtures and things and odd balances, but it's not going to date as zero. As 80,000 years, it's going to come up as a date. And I think some of them came up at like 4,000 years or something like that, 20,000 years. No, I think 20,000 was the number, which was still way longer than the age of the Earth, according to the creationists. The posting I put up was this paleo group that's a bunch of young Earth creationists, and it contains the Lafferty article in 1991 where he interviewed all the people involved. It was a beautiful thing, and it's not otherwise available online, so it's a nice secondary accounting of it. And plus, it's also giving the creationist response to all of this stuff. Their dissemblings and missing the points and all that kind of stuff. So it's a useful little side issue. And it reminds me of why it's really fun to not only read the regular science material, but also to read exactly what the creationists are saying, because it's at that level that you can now connect up the dots to believe. We got Brian Stevens put up a thing, Compel Believer YouTube.watch. I'm not sure what that refers to. You might want to make a little reference, Brian, to the context of that. Sounds like they were also talking a little bit about the Shroud of Turin. There was the Mandelbrot says about a lot of someone who still thinks the Shroud of Turin is a real artifact of Christ. Oh yeah, there's an awful lot of those. There's a whole subculture that just insists it's really, really true. And it's basically a back and forth where they try to find little fragments of the data field that makes sense within the idea that it's actually a couple thousand years old and it's the burial shroud of Christ. And so all the information to the contrary, that the radiocarbon dating that was done shows that it's from the medieval period, exactly the time frame that it was if it were a forgery, and that even so it would be inconsistent with an actual burial shroud. The body wouldn't be wrapped the way they actually wrap bodies in those days, and all of these things. It's a fascinating. I'm trying to think of the guy. I can't remember what his name is. Ian Wilson, I think. He's one of the big pushers in this, and you find documentaries and stuff that pop up on the Science Channel and History Channel and others periodically about it. So there's a still very adamant subculture, almost always Roman Catholics, because you don't have that yearning for the iconic relic element so much in Protestant culture, and so they're not less concerned about it in the same way that people who see the Virgin Mary on toast and the squeegee marks on windows tend to show up in a Catholic context. Miraculous healings like Medjugorje over in Yugoslavia, what used to be Yugoslavia, I can't remember what Slavia it's in now, maybe Serbia or wherever. That is another thing that tends to pop up in that Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic context, but you don't see quite so many groupies, a few, but not so many in the Protestant culture. So there's a little side thing. Interstellar Atwar, they're getting many flat earths triggered. Antonio's doing a live hangout with them now. Yeah, flat earthers, I'll say this. They're fabulous examples of bad method, but they're also really inconsequential. And I think way too many people spend way too much time taking pot shots at flat earthers when there's no indication that they have any influence at all about anybody. Whereas young earth creationists and the intelligent design culture camp network of Tony Perkins and Jay Sekulow and Pat Robertson and the ACLJ and the people in the Pence branch of the Trump administration and Rick Perry and all of that, those are that creationist bloc. And they're actually making decisions for people. They're deciding what environmental rules we're having. They're deciding what legal rules and labor laws and housing things. Ben Carson at HUD. These people are actually making decisions for people's lives in a way flat earthers aren't. And so maybe less time spent jousting with flat earthers and more paying attention to the Culture Camp network that enables the Trump administration. This has been going on for quite a long time. That's another one of the bugbears that I go on, is that it should be standard operating procedure for reporters to be asking source methods questions of potential political candidates. But that's not what happens. Ooh, somebody undergoing teleportation there?
Sorry about that.
It happens. Yeah, I tend to keep my volume down on stuff. Even when I was recording some of the paralog stuff, at one of the little segments, suddenly the little whoop, whoop, sound from the cell phone nearby, and that would probably show up on the thing. So I had to retake the paragraph and all that stuff. It happens. Yeah, they get used to it. Anyway, reporters don't always ask methods questions. They ask data field questions at times or philosophical questions. But source methods of where you just made claim X, where did you get this from? And is the source you got it from a reliable one? You get a teeny bit of that. The pushback when President Trump was making the claims that there were millions of vote frauds in 2016. And I think the guy from ABC was asking him about it. And he sort of hemmed and hawed and replied a bit on the that it was from this Pew Research study. Well, no, it wasn't. Pew Research they had done surveys where they suggested that there were probably millions of people that were on the voter rolls that shouldn't be there anymore because they died or they moved to another state and re-registered. But there was no evidence being presented that even a tiny fraction of those names ended up voting fraudulently, which was the logic jump that Trump was doing. And naturally, a follow-up would have been a reasonable thing on that. So an awful lot of stuff that goes on in punditry debates, the crossfire approach to things that you get where you have pundit A and pundit B pot-shotting at each other, they tend not to deal with source methods issues either. And ideally, it should be a matter that some basic literacy issues should be conveyed. If a political candidate can't explain in a paragraph, short, quick, about what are the proximate causes of World War I and what was the ultimate consequences of it, then that shows that they're a historical illiterate and probably can't make decisions relating to geopolitics today. If they think the Earth is 6,000 years old, warning flag, Tortugan alert, they're clearly able to ignore data field at a drop of a hat and therefore shouldn't be in political office because now people like that will still get elected. There was a young earth creationist that just got elected in, I think, either Wyoming or Montana, who was full-blown young earth creationist, and it was known beforehand, pretty much. But the electorate there is very politically conservative and very religious, so he gets elected fair and square. That's going to happen. But there are other people who slip in under the wire because they didn't really were known to be what they were, and that's happened in the Dover case. The people that were on the school board there ended up, a lot of them were full-blown young earth creationists, but you only found that out when it hit the fan over the pandas and people and it became a lawsuit and suddenly it was dealing with the courts and all of that kind of came out post hoc. But why wasn't it known before they even get on the board? That should all be part of the vetting process at the local level with reporters and concerned activist citizenry and all the rest. And because today we live in an interconnected world where old farts like me can do YouTubes and information is accessible through online search, and everyone should be connecting up so that people can exchange information quickly so that everybody can play at their best game. There's no excuse for that not happening that I can see, other than we just don't do it. And the stakes are getting high enough that that doesn't cut it. We are living in a time of potential peril, not only for the nation, but the planet, that's becoming with a situation where there are too many ideologues and too many demagogues and too many scientific illiterates and too many throw the press in jail and fake news and lying media accusations and all of that. That's going to have consequences not only for us, but for our posterity, who are going to look back on us and say, what the hell were you thinking you were doing? And we'll all have to answer for it. There we go. There's a soapbox. Anyway, let me take a look over there. Aptivist is muted. Check my time on here, 5:41. We're about 3/4 of the way through. I was just listening to Aaron Ra earlier. He was doing a speech, just posted this September, and perfectly fine. Usual boilerplate from Aaron. It's most of it. I have absolutely no complaints about it. He's a very knowledgeable person, but he tends to focus a bit too narrowly on just creationism as a religious ideology, which demographically is true, but it tends to disguise what's going on at that source method's basement in their heads. And a perfectly fine illustration of it, and I think I pointed this out in a comment on the video, is that Michael Denton, one of the big poobahs in the intelligent design movement, one of their heavy guns, he's an agnostic. He has no religious faith at all. And yet methodologically, he's doing the same level of mistakes that somebody who is religious, like Steve Meyer, is doing, or farther down in the network, Paul Nelson, who's a young earth creationist in the intelligent design movement, or then move over to Answers in Genesis, where they're now doctrinally committed to young earth creationism. The source methodology of all of those people is the same. They have a limited data field. They're ignoring relative information. They don't think through what they think happened. They don't have a concept for changing their mind. It's all the same data field mistakes that are occurring because of those source methods errors. And that's why I need to ideally see way more people getting on the bandwagon into this, because it ups our game, and it also is really good at combating the opponents because they can't play this game. Hitomi says, hey, I've been cracking away at YEC. I know they love to repeat things like Dr. Lyle's, you can't know the one-way speed of light. Yeah, that would be L-I-L, it'd be L-I-L-S-E, not Y, but close on that. Yeah, Jason Lyle, that's his little argument. And there's, it puts the young earth creationism in a weird little niche market, because modern cosmology and so much of the anthropic reasoning that occurs is dependent on standard physics, not the young earth creationist pseudophysics. And so you get some weird types like Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible answer man, who is simultaneously a young earth creationist, but an old universe creationist, because he's really attracted to that stuff. Eric, listen, why did you stop updating your Patreon page? I am a bad dog on that. I haven't put the links up to the newer videos. I'm hoping that people have gotten just into the habit of just linking directly and getting onto it and seeing the new videos that way. I'll have to go through and put the updates on in there. One more thing to do, one more thing to do, one more thing to do. It's be easier if I don't have to worry about updating another thing to connect up to other things to get up to other things. Plus the fact that none of that money actually gets to me. So it's a frustrating catch-22. How much effort do I need to spend? But I am committed, absolutely, independent of how much money actually gets to me, that everybody who does contribute to that gets the direct mention and the thank you on the evolution hours, because that's what they're supporting directly. There was a question, Mark Beiser up there. I think Pence is to Trump what Biden was to Obama and Potato Man was to the first Bush, only there to discourage assassination. That's quite a great range of people, though, in there. That I would agree that Mike Pence is a very creepy character, and that it's a good reason not to want to impeach Trump is because President Pence will be an ideologue, whereas Trump is just a narcissistic buffoon. And so it'll be a calmer branch But all of that culture camp activity that's going on in the Trump administration as we speak will go on in spades with a quieter white-haired enabler who won't be as prone to fireworks as Mr. Trump is. And so that fellow worries me. Yeah, indeed. Vice presidents generally are the butt of jokes. This goes back a long way. And people were making fun of Hubert Humphrey under Johnson. And it's been a traditional thing because vice presidents don't have anything to do other than to tap the gavel in the Senate, although with a closed Senate, as we currently have, that actually can matter. So there's another. If you think that gee, RJ's gone off onto politics, I'm afraid we can't avoid that. Politics comes about by the attitudes that the people have and the attitudes of their elected officials that the people elect through one way or another. And so all of those ideas that can be good or bad methods ultimately percolate up through the system to the people that we get. And we get those that we elect and those that we deserve based upon how well we force them to pay attention to the data field. And at the moment, we're in a perilous time that I'm worried about. Some decisions are relatively easily work pastable. You tack this way and then you can tack back in the next administration. But other things, the people that Trump has put on the court, Mitch McConnell went into high gear to funnel as many people as possible through the mill. So they've been stacking the district courts with a lot of people that are going to be on the court for lifetime appointments. And they're going to be percolating that Federalist Society, conservative constitutionalism attitude, some of whom are also more in the dominionist frame of reference. And how well that's going to play out for a lot of rulings on labor issues, on environmental issues, on free speech issues over the next 20 or 30 years, I don't know. To some extent, justices will not necessarily behave as their ideological supporters thought. Earl Warren Court, he was put in as a conservative, and it didn't turn out that way. And even Scalia would often have some very strident pro-free speech things that would make some of his supporters kind of go, whoa. But on other areas, my particular bugbear is his dissent on the Edwards v. Aguilar case, the evolution case back in the 1980s. And I think that was rank pseudoscience on his part. And I did an analysis of it in tip 1.6. You'll find the whole discussion of that. And you'll find that at my main website. And there's also an HTML version of it at justtortucan.com. I'm slowly typing in clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Which is supposed to have some of these things on stupid cut and paste, but I'm slow. Anyway, the Scalia thing is a pure methods analysis because you're able to see how a person on the Supreme Court in the 1980s was effectively accepting the tropes of the creationists. And we're not talking intelligent design here. We're talking literal six-day flood geology, young earth creationism, pseudoscience. And apparently Scalia just couldn't see anything wacky about that. He was just homing in on aspects of the evolution side of it. And so I went through his entire dissent point by point to analyze that and from a source methods direction. So anybody who wants to go plowing around in that, there's more material there at my website that won't do a damn bit of good unless people actually read it and talk about it. Brian Stevens says that it's why we have the Middle East at war since like forever. Yeah, it's partly a squabble of religions, but not so much that, believe it or not, but a culture clash over the remnants of colonialism and authoritarian governments and tribal cultures and their ins and outs. One of the reasons why Afghanistan has been a mess for a very long time. And even modern industrialized nations can have problems there. An awful lot of what we see going on in Putin's Russia shouldn't surprise anybody that knows the history of Russia. This is not a culture that has an ingrained democratic tradition. They have a worshiper of authority figures. They tend to idolize the authority figures. The same kind of babushkas out in the middle of Siberia who would be muttering over the icon and lighting a candle to the Tsar in St. Petersburg. Oh, the little father will help us, is doing the same thing with Putin today. And the Russian Orthodox Church is back in on the field. An awful lot of the homophobia and xenophobia against immigrants is being fomented by the Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe. And so you've got consequences that are playing out old political grudges, just as so much of what went on in the Troubles in Northern Ireland was more than just a battle between Protestants and Catholics. It was between one class of people who were the Protestants who controlled the land as opposed to the majority that were Roman Catholics, and the elitism and prejudice against the lower working classes. And that there's a lot of stuff going on in that debate. And if we can survive the next 20 or 30 years, maybe without blowing ourselves to smithereens or having a big depression and a global war like happened after the 1920s, I think that would be preferable to the alternative. Yeah, we got Aptivist. Yes, the GOP is working with Russians to push an anti-LGBTQ propaganda. That's true. There's the one leitmotif that pops up in an awful lot of that culture camp framework is their homophobia and their now transgender phobia. And you see it constantly with Tony Perkins, with the Family Research Council. In fact, I'll be putting a little reference to that in the new Answers book, because he links up, and Aaron Ra knows about a lot of these little cultural links up too. Frankly, I think he could even go into more detail on some of these things. But I had been following these culture camp, and let me type in a little word. It's my usage of Bismarck's old term. Kulturkampf means culture war. And it's a term that pops up in Germany because Bismarck wanted to break the power of the Roman Catholics that had their parochial education system, and he wanted all the education to be run by the imperial government with modernity and all of that stuff. But it's a handy term to describe the culture war mentality of anti-evolutionism. And the racism and sexism angles Antediluvian brings up, yeah, although they play out differently today than they did in previous times. You have a lot of weird circumstances. If the one thing you could say about anti-evolutionism in the old days, it's that it was purely white people and purely men, and that there was definitely a nice old-fashioned Southern racism angle to young Earth creationism all the way into the 60s and into the 1970s. But it has undergone a bit of a mutation since. And you now find very active spokesmen and spokeswomen in the creationism movement, Georgia Purdom at the Young Earth Creationist side, Ann Gager over in Intelligent Design Land, and they're treated completely as authority figures and equal and all of that. So the kind of conventional sexism, in the same way that Ann Coulter, who is kind of an acolyte of the late Phyllis Schlafly. And Phyllis Schlafly is as wacky conservative as you can get. She was a young Earth creationist. She liked Kent Hovind, all of that. And yet she was also a woman in a man's world, forging ahead. Betsy DeVos, I'm sure, has a lot of that same feeling, that she's a woman in a man's world, but she's pushing for the right ideology, which is right-wing ideology. In the same way that Kavanaugh, the current Supreme Court nominee, is not a sexist in the old classic thing of the world. He's wanting to promote women and all that, but it's still reflective of a particular cultural frame as to what ideology the person reflects. So the racism and sexism angles have become more complex. The racism manifests in an awful lot of economic disparity, because you have a circumstance that's been festering for a very long time, of where the housing system with the FHA loans were prejudiced against blacks, so that they couldn't buy into the suburban lifestyle. So they're disconnected from that whole framework, and therefore they get sequestered off into ghettos in cities that are failing because the white flight is leaving because there are too many black people coming in. And so it gets this dismal feedback loop that gets linked into racism, because the targets of the thing are black kids more often than not today. And yet this can be the case that the one shooting the black kid may be a black policeman, so or even policewoman. And so it's a more complex issue, but it's still, the fact is that too many people can't live out a life where their spirit of innovation can take flame and contribute in wonderful ways to the society. They're not able to get the right education. They're getting shot when they're 16 years old, so they can never do anything. And a culture that eats its own that way is not going to be competitive or desirably so in the bigger context. So that's some of the larger context of things, and we're nearing the end of the hour on here. Antediluvian atheist says it's a personality thing. Conservatives need well-defined borders. Gay and trans people blur borders of sexuality and gender, and therefore bad. That's a useful observation. I don't have the technical papers right at the drop of a hat, but we know that there are actual cognitive differences and personality differences between liberals and conservatives. And we know that anti-evolutionists tend to be from conservative to really conservative. So somebody at Kent Hovind is on the hyper-conservative wackaloon branch of things. But even at the most less conservative branches of things in the intelligent design movement, they're still very much Trump supporters. They like the old style of political conservatism that you would have found in edges of the Bush administration's father and son, and still also in the Trump administration. And so it's not surprisingly seen that people on the other side of the fence that are anti-evolutionists or evolutionists will have a broader mix, but they're not going to be in that same hyper-conservative demographic that is so attractive to anti-evolution belief systems. So those things ultimately are personality and psychological things. I embrace it, all of that stuff together in that little Tortucan concept, which I'd like to see people make use of more. Instead of saying that somebody is a liar, which an Aaron Ra might say of a creationist, I'd say, no, they're just being Tortucan. They're not thinking about things they don't want to think about. They're deflecting. They're doing all the things Tortucans do quite naturally. And now I'm not insulting them. I'm describing them. And I'm not implying that they are necessarily being mendacious. They may be saying a falsehood, but they may believe it's true. Just as I'm sure Kent Hovind believes everything he says is true. I don't for a moment think that he's a liar in the sense of mendaciousness. He has a method so poor that he can't filter information reliably. And he builds up a little box set of things he believes to be true, and they become inviolably true for him, and he can't possibly move outside of that little box. Jordan Peterson, I haven't looked into, Antediluvian brings him up. I haven't looked into him in great detail. He's the current controversy du jour over the role of religion in the public realm and all that. I think, if memory serves me, the standard doctrinal creationists don't much like him because he's too squishy liberal for them. And the more conventional freethinkers will regard Peterson as just kind of a wooist accommodationist. And if I've misjudged his position on that, let me know somewhere. Anyway, on ape yes. Well, mute yourself and give us a comment, Aptivist. If you've done some study on Peterson, you can give us some perspective on that. Tick, tick.
Hey. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm by any means an expert on Peterson, but practically anything I get from him, I get from Rationality Rules and TMM. But
what are the main points?
I mean, he makes some really strange statements, like the Egyptians and all them, that they knew about DNA because of these spiraling snakes. And so he edges into pseudoscience himself.
Yeah, and that'll be fun. I suspect
he's famous for his word salad.
Yeah, kind of like Deepak Chopra, that they have kind of like word salads that sound nice and they're cozy and they're effective. Bumper stickery kinds of things. Yeah, I suspect if he veers more into the evolution field, then he'll be crossing my scopes more. I don't think he's popped up very much on that. I think he may kind of generally accept evolution, kind of, sort of.
Yeah, I'm not sure about his thoughts on evolution.
Yeah, that's why I'd like to measure people, because the nice thing about the creation evolution case, and to some extent climate change as well, because it's all empirical science, but I study the creation evolution case in far greater detail. It's that, yes, Andy Lubinath says there is a reason that JP is called the Christian Deepak Chopra. Thank you. Yeah, so the connection was not a bad one. Yipes, I think I just had a brain fart where I forgot what I was about to say. Yeah, so it was a methods-based thing, but the upshot is that if everybody forces everybody to play methods games and looks into source data, and yeah, that's why it was evolution. Why evolution is such a handy little thing, because it's an empirical thing. It's been around for quite a while. You've got 150 years of track record. You have 150 years of anti-evolutionists to look at, so you can see longer trends in terms of how the apologetics run and what ideas act as tropes and what doesn't. And you can follow up to see what sort of material gets discussed and what doesn't. And so you can measure people very precisely on their methodology. So there are some, for example, and I bumped into them online, where they say, oh, I believe in evolution. And then you try to pin down, what do you mean by you believe in evolution? What kind of evolution do you believe in? And it turns out they like that microevolution stuff. They're okay with that. But no changes outside of kinds, no speciation, no macroevolution stuff. And so you always have to be careful when people will dangle a term and try to use it as a deflection, when you really need to pin down what they mean by it. And that's a source methods issue. That the definition, I've been trying to wean the sciencey based people off, because if they give the textbook definition of evolution, they can be led astray. I put a posting up on this, and there was a little bit of a back and forth with Paul Braderman's bunch about it, and to no effect. But the normal textbook one is a change in allele frequencies in populations over time. And it's true. That's what evolution involves. But an awful lot of creationists can accept that. They can accept change in allele frequencies within a kind, no problem. Whereas if you use my general definition, natural branching common descent, now you're forcing them onto that field where it's the common descent part, it's branching speciation, and it's natural. It's not intentional, it's not teleological, it's not designed. That form of evolution measures people much more precisely. And don't forget to pin people down on chronology, where people will go on and on origins or busts. Where did life come from? But you don't know when they think life began. And some of these people will be young Earth creationists. They think this was happening 6,000 years ago, not 4.2 billion. And so if you don't pin down those chronology matters fairly early, then you can't arrange them into a proper sequencing thing. So map of time issues and data field issues and source issues, this is all part and parcel of source methods. And you'll find that if somebody is a flaming Tortucan, they won't be able to answer these questions because they've never thought about them, because it didn't occur to them to think about them, because they don't want to think about them, because if they thought about them, they're going to have to fill in the data field to such an extent that they're never going to be able to account for it, and they'll have to change their mind, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So we're past 6 o'clock. Let's look up what we've got in the other field here. We got Hitomi says, if it was the meaning something like Egyptians knew if we had like 2 fat cows breed, you might end up with fatter cows. Yeah, I believe that ancient peoples would figure that out. Yeah, this may be referring to Aaron Ra. He brings that up as an example in just the lecture that I was listening to today, although there's an awful lot of repetition to it. About the Bible and the bit that if you put animals in front of a striped fence, that they'll generate stripes that way, which is, there actually are a couple of young Earth creationists who've tried to defend that genetically. They can't, but it's a funny thing to watch them try. And so that's another little matter that goes on here. The one field that people should remember is that you've got a huge block in just my own areas that I'm covering in TIP. I'm bumping into the work of over 60,000 scientists, and I don't have to guess at the number because I keep track of it in the spreadsheets. And of those, virtually none are anti-evolutionists, the people actually doing the work. And of those who do, who are anti-evolutionists, who have PhDs and have been published and stuff, they're not typically heavy hitters. In fact, none of them are. That you don't find people who are the movers and shakers. You don't find somebody who is really prominent in their field, who gets up and says, gee, all this information here, I just can't fit it into the evolutionary paradigm anymore. I've really got to junk it. No, we don't find that. And it's not because they're blinded by their Darwinian assumptions. It's because they know too much of the data field. It's no coincidence that Marsh, the creationist back in the 1940s, that came up with baraminology, that attempt to work out the kinds rigorously, bogged down because there was too many species even then. And the modern creationists, the baraminologists that are picking up where he left off in the 1990s on down to the present, and there's only just a handful of those researchers, Todd Wood, Kavanaugh, that bunch, and a few hangers on. The data field hasn't gotten smaller. It's gotten exponentially bigger because now you have the genetic data and way more paleontology and cladistic systematics, which they use as a crutch, as I pointed out in the debate with Kent when I was explaining baraminology to somebody in the questioner field, and Kent didn't know anything about it. That basically what they're doing is scavenging the technical data field that the regular paleontologists generate for their cladistic analysis, all these character states, numerical, and they plug them into an analytical thing where they hope that when you plot them out, the separate kinds will be big blobs that won't intersect at any point. But if they do intersect, then they're actually the same kind. That's the overall, to put it down in a nutshell, that's the method that they use. Well, in some cases, they find a whole bunch of connections that are troubling for traditional creationism, like all the horse sequence blobs together. So that means that the evolutionists were right. Arachotherium to Equus is an evolutionary sequence, a monobaramin. And in other cases, it's uncomfortable for them. They really kind of want family relationships to stay separate kinds. So what they do before they get to the analysis, they start lopping data off. And in the one that was done on the reptile-mammal transition, which if you get my book, you'll find out about it, he flushed a third of his data down the drain before he actually started doing the analysis. Well, boy, he manages to come up with a kind that way. Good. Isn't that nice? Okay, you got to bounce. Love you. Love you back. And he's one of my readers of the Paralogs of Fog. Somebody who has definitely found that my novel is good as well. And I'm working on the second one of those. So you can find links to that too at my website. Shameless plug. Need to do. So we're past the hour. I think we have covered the main bases. I think I've covered all the stuff that I put links up to in the video. I'd like to thank Aptivist for showing up because I like interacting with organisms as much as I like talking. And, and also because you had seen the Hovind debate. So that was helpful.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the Hovind debate, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's only an hour and a half. Each of us got a half hour, and then there was a half-hour Q&A. And watch as much as possible Kent Hovind's body language and expressions during the course of the program, as well as taking notes on what we're talking about in the subject matter, because I enjoyed it. I didn't feel pressured or put upon in my responses. I didn't have to feel scrambling for things. I felt I was in good control of the data field and was able to keep ahead of him quite nicely. And so I feel good at it. Yeah, Strike says, I've got Evolution Slam Dunk, buy it. As a shameless plug from the author who can use the royalties, I agree, but it's also a damn good book. And
indeed it is.
Yeah, it can only make a difference if people read it and use it. And it's something where you'll not only have a lot of information available, and you don't need to necessarily be anal retentive to track down every single source in there. It's a big resource. I've got thousands of resources in there. The bibliography runs for 100 pages. But the point is that you can do your underlines and note tabs and things where you go, holy shit, I didn't know that, and add that to your repertoire and bring yourself more and more up to speed. And believe you me, if you're familiar with the reptile-mammal transition, you are 800 miles ahead of every anti-evolutionist, because they won't be able to come onto the field. Literally, when I just bring up the reptile-mammal transition online, if they're an intelligent design advocate, I know they're screwed, because there's literally nothing online in the intelligent design literature for them to draw on the reptile-mammal transition. Every single example of where intelligent design has responded, and badly, on the reptile-mammal transition are in books, offline books. Denton's books are not online. Myers's books are not online. Dembski's books are not online. Philip Johnson's Darwin on Trial is not online. So if you haven't read the regular book, they have nothing to copy. So they're going to have to scavenge around, in which case there's only a limited number of creationist sources that they can find. The old Gish 1981 piece is online, but not his 1995 book. They're going to find Woodmore, which I devoted a detailed analysis to, and a few other stuff that is peripheral, but still available. So you'll know about Krieger and and also the stuff from Truth in Science over in Britain. I mean, you'll have the whole shebang. So you can sit back from the Olympian heights and just wait and see what little they know about it and try to find out what field they're coming from, what direction they're coming from, and then you can map them into your data field that you'll have from Slam Dunk. So this is a shameless plug for why the book is out there and why I wrote it, and why Jackson Weed and I, who couldn't come in, by the way, for this, he's in a class on geography stuff, and he says it's kind of boring, but you know, you got to do what you got to do as a student. And we're both plowing ahead on our chapters for the new Rocks Are Still There book, and it will do for the Answers in Genesis gang what I did in the Reptile Mammal Transition book, which is pulverize. That's the plan. Okay, so we will stop the broadcast today. Thank you. We're a little bit past the hour. We got all the links and stuff up. Everybody's seeing my new high definition camera and all of that, to where wall widescreen. And yes, those are CDs and DVDs and stuff behind me, the object of decades of work. That I fortunately, if I had to try to find that stuff now, some of it would be unavailable, and second, I wouldn't have the money to buy it. So I can sit on my little happy things and love my previous life. So anyway, Andy DeLuven says he has the book, but he never used it. Is way over the heads of those I interact with. They're at the level of God wrote DNA, so no amount of biology is going to help. Well, at the very least, though, you've got a sense of paleontology angle that you can deal with. That anyone that gets involved in the exchange that's trying to dispute it, you can use it from that angle. But I can use it in absentia, in the fact that if somebody can't get on the field, my favorite example, of course, is probanognathid. See, I keep on running on past my hour. Probanognathid are the one I want everybody to know much about, because they're the little critters about the size of a mouse that are the double jaw forms that were predicted by evolution. Robert Broom figured out that the only way you could get from a reptile to a mammal jaw is through a double jaw form that no known life form had. So he was predicting an entirely new form of life that had this layout. And it turns out they actually existed in exactly the time frame required. So probanognathid and diarthrognathids are a predicted exact life form. And so if the designer believes everything was designed, then the designer really likes evolutionists because they're making stuff that fit. And I've never found a creationist and tried to get around to it. One of them tried to argue that probanognathid were just beavers. I'm not making this up. They're just like a beaver. Even by the paleontology, that won't work. And plus, no known beaver, no mammal has a double jaw layout the way the probanognathid did. Sorry, they lived a couple 100 million years earlier. It's way back on the line. So, so you can measure the ignorance of the person. Thank you, Abe, that RJ, Jackson, and Aaron. Yeah, I'd like to get as many of us together to do things so that we can avoid repetition and build on each other. I learn a lot vetting Jackson's material that he sends to me, and vice versa, because we each learn from each other. And the more that people do that in that interconnective mode, it speeds up the process. I can save Jackson research time because I've already done the footwork, and he saves me research time because he's already done the homework. We can check up on each other's source base in the course. When I'm tracking down the material that he brings up, I'm looking up the primary sources, I'm cross-checking the material, I'm reminded of other stuff. So we're all improving each other's game. And and you learn so much, and there's so much to learn. Wow, the 21st century is magnificent for science. And I don't want to have it broken by stupid politicians. No. Okay, so really going to stop this time. Bye.